I didn't notice anything different when I left the house that afternoon. That's the thing about quiet changes, you don't hear them arriving. You only realize later that the air in the room has shifted. It was one of those evenings where the sky looks like it's been rubbed out with a thumb. Gray softens everything. The kind of weather that makes you walk faster, shoulders slightly hunched, keys already pinched between your fingers before you even reach the door. I'd been gone for maybe 2 hours, running errands I could have done another day. Groceries. A pharmacy pickup. Nothing special. But on my way back I saw my aunt's car across the street, parked with its front wheels slightly turned like she'd stopped mid-thought. That detail stuck in my mind because my aunt was a careful person. She parked straight. She returned shopping carts. She corrected people gently, like tidying up the world without wanting credit for it. I remember pausing before going inside, looking at her car, then at the house. The curtains were drawn in the living room. The porch light wasn't on. Everything looked normal, and still I felt the slightest tremor of something I couldn't name. Like when you wake up from a dream and can't tell if you're still inside it. When I opened the door, I heard the familiar small sounds, the refrigerator hum, the faint tick of the wall clock. No voices. No movement. I called out anyway, half out of politeness, half out of habit. Aunt Lisa? Nothing. Then I saw her note on the kitchen counter. It was written in her neat, slanted handwriting, the letters always a little too perfect to be casual. Stopped by to drop off what we talked about. Didn't want to bother you. Love you. Call me later. L. What we talked about. I read the line twice. The truth was, we hadn't really talked about anything. Not directly. Not with words that would have made sense on paper. We'd had a conversation a week ago that drifted near something, circled it, and then backed away like a dog that knows a door is closed. It happened after dinner at her place. She'd asked about school, about work, about how I'd been sleeping, and I'd said all the safe answers. Then she'd asked, almost too lightly, "Are you still keeping everything inside?" And I'd shrugged like it wasn't a real question. Like I wasn't a person who practiced disappearing inside his own skin. She hadn't pressed. She never pressed. She just looked at me in that way she had, like she could see the version of me I kept folded up and hidden. Now, in the kitchen, with the note in my hand, I felt my throat tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I set the groceries down. I went to my room. I told myself I was only going to put things away, then call her, then get on with my evening. My room looked untouched at first. The bed made the way I always made it. The desk lamp angled slightly left. The laundry basket in the corner. But then my eyes landed on the chair. On the back of the chair was a garment bag, the kind you'd use for a formal outfit. And hanging from the zipper pull was a small tag, like a bookmark. For you. No pressure. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some grand reveal. It was just there, placed neatly, intentionally, like she'd folded the corner of a page in a book and left it waiting. I stared at it for so long my eyes started to feel dry. My first instinct was anger, and it surprised me. Not because I was furious at her, but because the anger came from fear that she'd guessed something I'd spent years denying even to myself. Fear that her quiet kindness had just put a spotlight on a part of me I kept in the dark. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to breathe normally. I tried to think about something else. Anything else. But the garment bag was like a soundless question. It filled the room without making a noise. I had known, on some level, for a long time, that there was a door in my mind I kept shut. I'd pressed my back against it for years. I'd told myself it was just curiosity. Just imagination. Just a weird phase. I'd built a whole identity around not opening it. But now someone else had placed a key in my room. I reached out. I didn't unzip it. I just touched the fabric of the bag with my fingertips. It was smooth, clean, new. Not a random item from a thrift store. Not an old costume. It felt chosen. My heart beat faster, and I hated that it did. I hated how alive I suddenly felt. I stood up quickly, like movement could shake the feeling loose. I paced. I glanced at the mirror on my closet door and then looked away, as if my reflection might betray me. Finally, I took the bag off the chair and set it on my bed. I held the zipper pull between my fingers. I told myself I didn't have to do anything. I could just put it away. I could pretend it didn't exist. Then I thought of my aunt's handwriting, no pressure. That was her style. She didn't shove. She offered. She left doors unlocked and let you decide whether to walk through. I unzipped the bag halfway. The first thing I saw was a soft color I didn't usually allow near my body. Not because I didn't like it, but because I trained myself to act like I didn't. A pale, dusty blue. A fabric that looked like it belonged to someone who wasn't constantly bracing for impact. I pulled it out slowly. It was a simple outfit. Not flashy. Not a caricature. A cardigan, light and draping. A top underneath that looked comfortable, not tight or revealing. And a skirt that fell modestly, not short, not loud, just quietly feminine in a way that made my chest ache. Alongside it, tucked carefully, was a pair of leggings, a soft scarf, and a small pouch. The pouch held a hairbrush, a set of bobby pins, and a note folded into a smaller square. I opened the note with shaking hands. If you ever wanted to try, you can. If you never want to, that's okay, too. But you're allowed to know yourself. I'm proud of you even if you don't know what you're proud of yet. I sat down hard on the bed. The words hit me like a hand on the shoulder, steady, warm, grounding. And all at once I remembered moments I tried to erase. Being 8 years old and fascinated by the way my cousin's dress moved when she spun. Being 12 and staring too long at the women's section in a department store, then scolding myself in my head as if curiosity was a crime. Being 16 and finding myself drawn to softness, to certain shapes and colors, and convincing myself it was nothing, it was stupid, it was wrong. I'd spent years making sure nobody saw that side of me. Including me. Now my aunt had seen it anyway. Not in a gossiping way. Not in a mocking way. In a way that felt like she'd been sitting quietly beside that locked door for years, waiting for me to stop leaning my weight against it. I didn't try the clothes on that night. I just held them. I let myself feel the fabric against my hands. I laid everything out on the bed like evidence. Like a map. And I stared at my closet mirror again, longer this time, studying the face that looked back at me. The face I'd learned to keep neutral, to keep safe. The face that suddenly looked like it belonged to someone waiting. That night I barely slept. Not because I was excited in some simple way, but because my mind kept playing tug-of-war with itself. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake like I'd almost said something out loud. By morning, the clothes were still on the bed where I'd left them, folded more neatly than my hands could manage, because my aunt had probably folded them that way and my fear had been too respectful to disturb them. I got ready for the day in my usual uniform, jeans, a dark hoodie, sneakers. Clothes that erased shape. Clothes that made me feel like a background character in my own life. As I pulled the hoodie over my head, my gaze flicked to the pale cardigan on the bed. It looked like it belonged to a different version of me, one who moved through rooms without shrinking. I heard my phone buzz. A message from my aunt. You okay? I stared at it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then retreated. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't okay, and I wasn't not okay. I was opened. Finally I typed, I saw it, then, after a long pause, I added, I don't know what to do. I hit send before I could delete it. She replied a minute later. Do nothing today. Just breathe. It's not a deadline. It's a possibility. Possibility. That word felt like standing near a ledge. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was wide. All day, everything felt slightly unreal. At work, I answered questions and nodded at conversations and laughed at the right times. But my thoughts kept drifting back to my room, to the garment bag, to the way the fabric had felt in my hands. It wasn't about wanting attention or wanting to shock anyone. It was about something quieter, the feeling that I'd been living with a part of myself taped over. By late afternoon, I found myself walking slower on the way home. Not because I didn't want to get there, but because I did. When I opened my bedroom door, the first thing I did was close it behind me carefully, as if the air outside might contaminate what I was about to do. I stood in the center of the room and looked around. It was my room, my safe place, and yet it felt like a stage now. Like the walls were waiting to see what I'd choose. I went to the bed. I touched the cardigan first. It was light, almost weightless. I lifted it and held it up against my chest. The color made my skin look different. Softer somehow. Or maybe I was imagining that because I wanted it to be true. I wasn't thinking about being someone else. That's what surprised me. I wasn't fantasizing about becoming a completely different person with a different life. I was just curious about what it would feel like to let my outside match something inside me that had been quietly asking for space. I took a deep breath and changed. Not in a hurry, not with excitement, but with the careful focus of someone handling something fragile. I pulled off my hoodie, my jeans, my t-shirt. I stood for a moment in plain undershirt and shorts, feeling exposed in my own room, like I'd removed armor. Then I stepped into the leggings. They slid on smoothly, hugging my legs in a way my usual clothes never did. The fabric was soft, almost comforting, like a hand placed gently. I expected to feel silly. Instead, I felt aware. Present. I put on the top next, simple and neat. It sat differently on my shoulders than my usual shirts. Then the skirt, careful, slow, like I was afraid of tearing something invisible. And then the cardigan. When I pulled the cardigan on, it draped over me like it belonged there. I stared down at my hands at the ends of the sleeves. Something inside my chest loosened, just a little, and I didn't realize how tight it had been until it loosened. I walked to the mirror. I didn't recognize myself at first, not because I looked like someone else, but because my expression had changed. My face, usually tense, looked startled. Like I'd been caught in an honest moment. I turned slightly, watching the way the cardigan moved. I watched the way the skirt fell. I watched the way my posture shifted without me trying. My shoulders relaxed. My chin lifted a fraction. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some flawless transformation. My hair was still short and unstyled. My face was still the same. My body was still my body. But the feeling was unmistakable. I swallowed hard. My eyes stung. I didn't cry, but I came close, then I heard a sound outside my room, the front door, maybe a neighbor, maybe the house settling. My heart slammed. Panic rose like heat. I rushed to the bed, grabbing the hoodie like it was a rescue rope. For a moment I considered ripping everything off and stuffing it back in the bag. That old instinct, to erase, to hide, to lock the door again, came roaring back. I stood there in the outfit, hoodie in my hands, frozen. And then I realized something that hit me harder than the fear. I didn't want to take it off because it felt wrong. I wanted to take it off because I was afraid of what it meant. That was the difference. That was the crack in the wall. I set the hoodie down. I sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed, and I let the panic pass through me without obeying it. For the first time in a long time, I stayed with a feeling instead of running from it. The next few days became a strange new routine. Not the kind you tell people about. The kind you do quietly and then look at your own life like it belongs to someone else. I'd come home, make sure I was alone, close my door, and change into the outfit my aunt had left. Sometimes I'd add the scarf. Sometimes I'd just sit in the cardigan and leggings like that was enough. I'd do normal things, scroll on my phone, read, clean my desk, except everything felt slightly different because I felt different. What shocked me wasn't how good it felt. It was how calm it felt. It was as if my nervous system had been waiting for permission to stop fighting itself. But calm doesn't last when you've built your whole life around control. On the fourth evening, my aunt called me. I stared at the ringing phone, heart pounding, even though she was the safest person in my life. I answered anyway. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. Hey, she replied, her voice soft. How are you really? I didn't know what to say, so I told the truth in pieces. I tried it. There was a pause, not dramatic, not judgmental. Just space. Like she wanted me to fill it with my own words instead of hers. And, she asked. I looked at the mirror on the closet door. I wasn't dressed in the outfit right then, but my mind could still feel it. I don't hate it, I said. That was the safest sentence I could manage. She let out a quiet breath, like relief. You don't have to hate it, she said. You also don't have to label it. I'm not calling you to put you in a box. That word, label, hit something tender. Because that had been one of my biggest fears. That if I opened the door even a little, I'd be forced to declare something I didn't fully understand. I'm scared, I admitted. I know, she said. But fear isn't always a warning. Sometimes it's a sign you're near something important. I didn't answer for a moment. I could hear the hum of her kitchen through the phone, the faint sound of her moving around, living her life while I sat trapped in mine. How did you know? I asked finally. She didn't pretend not to understand what I meant. I didn't know, she said gently. I suspected. The same way you can suspect someone's holding their breath. It shows up in little ways. In what they avoid. In what they stare at too long. In how relieved they look when nobody's watching. My throat tightened. I never wanted to embarrass you, she continued. That's why I didn't make a big deal. I just left you an option. I wanted you to know someone in your life wouldn't flinch. Wouldn't flinch. That phrase lodged in my chest like a promise. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. The room felt warmer, not because of the heater, but because I felt less alone in it. Then, for the first time, I did something I hadn't dared yet. I opened the small pouch again and took out the hairbrush. It was such a simple object, and yet it felt like a step deeper into the room behind the locked door. My hair was short. Brushing it seemed pointless. But I did it anyway, slowly, watching myself in the mirror. The motion was gentle. Intentional. Almost ceremonial. Then I tried the bobby pins, awkwardly, just to see if I could pin a few strands back in a way that looked softer. It barely changed anything, but the act of trying mattered. It was like saying to myself, I'm allowed to explore. The suspense wasn't in whether I would transform into someone unrecognizable. The suspense was in whether I would keep choosing honesty over fear. And fear didn't like losing. The next day, my mom texted, Aunt Lisa stopped by the other day. Did she leave something? My stomach dropped. The door in my mind slammed halfway closed. I stared at the message until my eyes blurred. I could lie. I could say no. I could say I didn't know. But my aunt's voice echoed, someone in your life wouldn't flinch. I typed, yeah. Just some clothes then, before I could overthink it, I added, it's not what you think. I'm just figuring stuff out. My finger hovered over send. My heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my ribs. I hit send. There it was. The first time I'd ever admitted anything even remotely close to the truth to someone other than my aunt. The reply didn't come right away. Minutes passed. 10. 15. I paced my room like a trapped animal. Then my phone buzzed. Okay. Love you. We can talk when you want. No interrogation. No panic. No insults. No dramatic reaction. I sat down hard, dizzy with relief. Sometimes the monster you fear is just a shadow you've been feeding in your mind. And yet I knew, even with that relief, that the real test wasn't private acceptance. It was what I would do next with the space I'd just been given. Not a week later, my aunt invited me over for lunch. Not a serious meeting. Not a, we need to talk. Just lunch. That was her way, normal on the surface, life-changing underneath. I almost didn't go. Every instinct in me wanted to keep this private, contained, controllable. The outfit was safe in my room. My room was safe in my house. My house was safe in my routines. The moment I stepped outside that chain, I couldn't predict what would happen. But I went anyway. Her house smelled like herbs and clean laundry. She greeted me the same as always, with a hug and a hand on my shoulder that lingered a second longer than usual. We ate soup. We talked about harmless things. She told me a story about a coworker who tried to fix a printer with a butter knife. I laughed. I felt almost normal. Then she stood up and said, as casually as if she were offering dessert, "I have something for you. If you want it." My chest tightened again. I nodded once. She went down the hall and returned with a small box and a second garment bag, smaller than the first. "I'm not trying to turn you into a different person," she said, placing them on the table. "I'm trying to help you meet yourself." I looked at the box. My hands were trembling slightly. Inside were simple things. Not makeup, not anything dramatic. Just a soft headband, a pair of small stud earrings, clip-ons, not pierced, and a lip balm with a slight tint. There was also a small bottle of lavender-scented lotion. The second garment bag held a different outfit, a neutral sweater, a longer skirt in a darker color, and a pair of flats. My eyes burned again. I hated how close I was to crying all the time now. It made me feel weak, until I realized it wasn't weakness. It was thawing. "I don't know what I am," I said, voice low. "You don't have to," she replied. "You're allowed to be a question for a while." A question for a while. That sentence cracked something open even wider. Because I'd spent my whole life thinking I had to be an answer, immediately, or else I was nothing. "After lunch," she asked, "do you want to try it here?" "You don't have to. But if you do, you'll have someone nearby." My stomach flipped. The idea of wearing those clothes anywhere outside my room made my skin prickle. But her house felt safe. It felt like a pocket of air where nothing bad could breathe. Maybe, I said. She nodded like that was enough. She showed me to her guest room and left me alone. No hovering. No pressure. I stood there with the garment bag in my hands, staring at the bedspread and the framed photo on the dresser of my aunt and me when I was little. In the photo, I was grinning, arms thrown around her waist, completely unashamed of being a kid who needed someone. I changed slowly. The sweater was soft. The skirt heavier, swaying differently. The flats felt strange at first, like my feet didn't know how to stand in them. I put on the headband, then the clip-on earrings. The lip balm was subtle, barely noticeable, but it made my mouth look softer. Then I faced the mirror. I didn't look like a model. I didn't look like a fantasy. I looked like me, but honest. And that honesty was terrifying. I opened the guest room door and stepped into the hallway. My aunt was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard me and paused. For a second I saw her eyes widen, not in shock, but in recognition. Like she'd just seen a photograph develop. "You look comfortable," she said quietly. I didn't know how to answer. My throat felt blocked. I nodded once. She didn't gush. She didn't clap. She didn't make it a spectacle. She just walked over, adjusted the headband slightly, and said, "There." I felt my chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm, like my body was learning a new way to exist. We sat in the living room and watched a show I barely paid attention to. The whole time I was waiting for something bad to happen, some sudden knock at the door, a neighbor stopping by, a surprise visitor. Nothing happened, and that was the twist I wasn't prepared for. The world didn't end when I let myself be seen by one person. It just continued. Quietly. Kindly. Before I left, my aunt hugged me again and whispered, "Whenever you're ready, we can take another step. Or not. You're in charge." When I drove home, the steering wheel felt cold under my palms. The sunlight through the windshield looked different. Not brighter exactly, but sharper, like my eyes were waking up. I realized the door in my mind wasn't just open now. I had stepped through it. The next step didn't come with fanfare. It came with a decision so small it almost felt silly, and yet it was the bravest thing I'd done in years. I decided to wear something feminine outside. Not a full outfit. Not the skirt. Not the flats. Just the sweater from the garment bag, paired with my usual jeans. Something that could pass as neutral if someone didn't look too hard. Something that would still feel like a truth I was allowing into daylight. I stood in my room for 20 minutes before leaving, sweater on, hands sweating. Heart racing. I kept walking to the mirror, stepping back, leaning in, staring at myself like I was waiting for the reflection to either approve or warn me. You can always change, I told myself. You can always take it off. But the point, I realized, was that I always took it off. Not just sweaters. Not just clothes. I took off parts of myself every day to make other people comfortable. I grabbed my keys and left. The first 10 steps outside felt like walking through water. Every sound seemed louder, my shoes on the porch, the car door closing, the engine starting. At the grocery store, the fluorescent lights made everything feel exposed. I kept expecting someone to point, to laugh, to whisper. Nobody did. People were too busy choosing apples and checking their phones. Still, I felt my own fear scanning every face like a radar. Then, near the produce section, I passed a mirror-like surface on a refrigerator door and caught a glimpse of myself from the side. The sweater fell in a softer line than my usual clothes. My shoulders looked less rigid. My face looked calmer. And the emotional twist hit hard, right there between the oranges and the lettuce. I liked how I looked. Not in a vain way. In a relieved way. Like I'd been missing a note in a song and finally heard it. I stood still for a second, cart in my hands, breathing. Then I kept going. At checkout, the cashier glanced at me, smiled, and said, "Nice sweater." My heart jumped like a startled bird. "Thanks," I managed. I walked out of the store with my bag of groceries and my throat tight again, but this time the tightness wasn't fear. It was gratitude. Later that night, I texted my aunt. "I wore the sweater out," she replied. "How did it feel?" I wrote, "Like I was shaking the whole time." "But also like I could breathe," she replied. "That's growth. Shaky breathing is still breathing." But the story didn't smooth out after that. It didn't turn into a montage of confidence. Real change doesn't work like that. A few days later, I overheard two relatives talking at a family gathering. Not about me directly, but about kids these days, and people who can't just be normal. Their words weren't aimed at me, but they landed on me anyway. Like stones thrown into a pond, rippling out. I felt myself shrink inside. I felt the old door in my mind trying to swing shut again. I went to the bathroom and stared at my face in the mirror. I wasn't dressed feminine then. I looked like I always did. And yet I felt exposed anyway, because once you know a truth, you can't unknow it. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "You're not doing anything wrong." Then I left the bathroom and found my aunt. She was talking to someone in the kitchen. She caught my eye and immediately read the panic on my face like a subtitle. She excused herself and followed me to the hallway. "What happened?" she asked softly. I told her. I tried to shrug it off, but my voice shook. Her expression hardened, not toward me, but toward the cruelty of careless words. "Listen," she said. "Their opinions are not your identity. And you are not required to stay small so other people can stay comfortable." I swallowed. What if they find out? She held my gaze. Then we deal with it. One step at a time. But you don't punish yourself in advance for someone else's ignorance. Punish yourself in advance. That phrase hit like a bell. Because that's what I'd been doing. For years. I'd been hurting myself preemptively so nobody else could. That night, back home, I took the skirt out again. I laid it on the bed. I sat beside it and thought about how many years I'd lost to fear. And I decided I didn't want to lose more. The final shift wasn't a big reveal to the world. It was a quiet moment where I finally stopped treating my own feelings like contraband. It happened on another ordinary evening. The sky outside was darkening, the same rubbed-out gray as the first day my aunt left the garment bag. I realized the weather had looped back, like the story was offering me a mirror. I changed into the full outfit again, leggings, skirt, top, cardigan. I brushed my hair, pinned it back. I used the tinted balm. I put on the earrings. The motions were calmer now, not frantic, not shaky. Then I did something new. I sat at my desk and wrote. Not a social media post. Not a dramatic coming-out letter. Just a page in a notebook where nobody else would look. I wrote about the first time I noticed how I was drawn to certain textures and colors. I wrote about the shame I trained into myself like it was a chore. I wrote about how I'd confused secrecy with safety. I wrote about how wearing those clothes didn't make me someone else, it made me more present as myself. And then I wrote a sentence that made my hands stop moving for a moment. I deserve to be kind to myself. It sounds simple. But it felt like learning a new language. After I wrote it, I stared at the sentence until it stopped looking like a lie. Then I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at myself for a long time. The same face. The same eyes. But the expression was different, steadier, softer, less guarded. I didn't suddenly know exactly what label fit me. I didn't suddenly have a perfect plan for how to explain myself to everyone. I didn't suddenly become fearless. But I did know this, the door in my mind wasn't a threat anymore. It was an entrance. My phone buzzed. A message from my aunt. Proud of you. No matter what. I stared at it, warmth spreading through my chest in a way that felt like a blanket settling. I typed back, thank you for leaving it, then I added, thank you for not making it scary. She replied, you did the brave part. I just held the light. I sat on the edge of my bed and let that land. Held the light. That's what her small act had been. Not dramatic, just intentional. A garment bag on a chair. A note that said no pressure. A doorway quietly unlocked. A light placed near a part of me I'd kept in shadow. And here's the truth I didn't understand until the very end, I hadn't been afraid of clothes. I'd been afraid of what it would mean to admit I wanted softness, to admit I felt seen in a different shape, to admit my identity wasn't a rigid line but something living, something that could breathe and change. My transformation wasn't magic. It wasn't instant. It was a slow, real process of letting myself exist without apology, one small choice at a time, until those choices added up to a life that felt like mine. I stood up, adjusted the cardigan, and for the first time I didn't rush to hide from my own reflection. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.